Hey everyone, I'm Kyle Racki, and this is LTV. On today's show, I'm going to be talking to Daniel Hebert, the Director of Sales at Proposify, and we're discussing enterprise sales. Often companies are putting their most junior sales reps in the hardest possible role, which is getting interest in enterprise companies. We're going to be breaking that down and dissecting those ideas on today's episode. Listen in while we have that chat. Talking about selling into the enterprise, I think when you look at a very simple sales process, maybe selling to smaller customers, I think the dream everybody wants to get to, and I think some are there, is that, you've got inbound leads who are ready to demo, ready to buy. You qualify them, you bring them into a demo process. It's a very quick decision, and then you begin rolling it out. Now, start moving up in deal sizes, and that becomes a whole other ballgame. Now you've got multiple decision makers, much longer sales cycles. So I think what we want to do is kind of just break down a few of our tips and recommendations for how to navigate those deals. So, the first one is that people who buy at larger deal sizes and bigger companies often have very different motivations than smaller buyers. I think that small buyers are usually looking at how do you maximize the upside, right? What problem are you solving and how can we possibly make more money or save more time with this product? Enterprise buyers are almost always protecting against the downside.
It's an interesting kind of concept because it's really hard to navigate. So in the book Challenger Sales, they did a bunch of research, and they basically identified there's 5.6 decision makers in an enterprise deal, right? So 5.6 people, which doesn't make sense at all. You can have 0.6 people, but essentially they need to come together and agree on the problem and the decision. And the big challenge with enterprise sales, and where a lot of reps kind of struggle a little bit, is that they have these meetings with the different decision makers and they know what's important for every single one, right? And everyone will have objections of some sort, want to protect their territory and whatever, but they fail to bring all the decision makers together into one room to agree collectively on what is the problem to be fixed and how do you come up with a solution. So oftentimes what happens is that cycles run super, super long, because nobody can agree on the problem, or the only thing that they can agree on is pricing, so that they make you discount by 50%, because what else can they agree on? So it's a really interesting concept of what are the different motivations of the buyers, and you might understand every single one individually, but you understand the collective decision that's being made. Because if you don't understand that, then you're going to have a really hard time selling an enterprise.
Yeah, I think the hard thing about that is that some of the decision makers, so if we're talking about the ones that ultimately understand that they have a problem and are looking for a solution, or at least open to a solution, ideally there's at least one or maybe more champions within that organization who are selling it internally. I think that's one of the key strategies that reps need to employ, is letting somebody internally do the selling for them. What I've found to be one of the biggest hurdles is two things: security and legal, and sometimes privacy, depending on what you're selling.
Yeah.
Which is that you've got people in these organizations who are basically meant to be the gatekeepers. And they have no vested interest, really, because at that size of an organization, nobody's worried about keeping the lights on or keeping their salary, other than they're worried about making a really bad decision. And so if the security guy says, no, you don't you don't have the right encryption method, that's part of what we expect from platforms that we use, they can feel really good about themselves that they shut you down, made themselves look really smart, and potentially protected the organization and really their job. They don't give a shit if they solve the problem of the marketing person or this salesperson who brought this to them.
Yeah, it's a tough one, because a lot of the jobs sometimes that are created at the enterprise level aren't necessarily, warranted. So somebody somewhere created a process, and because they created the process, there's paperwork involved, and that created a bunch of jobs. So all of a sudden, if you try to go around that, then somebody loses their job, right? If you go around it enough, then, process doesn't make sense. There's a lot of that happening, and it's hard to navigate because these people, just like you said, they have no stake in the game, right? IT doesn't really care if the sales rep gets its commission, or marketing solves that problem that needs to be solved. It's not their department. It's not their process. They didn't make it up. So why do it, right? Why take the risk?
Where does experience come into play? Because I think one of the playbooks that a lot of SaaS companies use that sell into enterprises, of course, they've got the outbound BDRs who are kind of slamming the phones and leaving voicemails and sending emails to try to get interest. And then once they get interest, they hand it off to the more seasoned AE to demo and close.
Yeah.
You've got an interesting perspective on that, though.
Yeah, I actually, this is a topic that I like getting into, but it can go for a while too. It's a bit of a rabbit hole.
Good, let's go down that rabbit hole.
I actually think that the process of outbound BDR is fundamentally broken because you're essentially hiring people that are 22, 23-year-olds, first job out of university, paying them shit money, giving them what's arguably the hardest job in sales to create interest and create opportunity and open up doors, and telling them, you need to go talk to this decision maker at the enterprise that has 30 years experience doing this specific thing, and you're fresh out of university and you have no idea what that person does. And you have no idea what the product that you're selling. You have no idea on the industry, yet we're going to pay you shit money to do it, and you're expected to hit this level. It's not going to happen, right?
Yeah. Unless they follow the script, right?
And then what happens if it goes off script, right?
Yeah.
What if it goes off script? They can't hold their grounds with somebody that has 30 years experience in a single industry doing a single job. Like, it's not going to happen. So fundamentally, that process is broken. Yet you talk to sales leaders or SaaS, companies or founders, and they view it as a junior role, when in reality, it's not at all a junior role. Like, it should be the most senior role in sales. And then because of the last, decade, the model has been run this way. So there's no senior salesperson or very little senior salespeople that want to do that role because they view it as like, I did my time for 2 years, now I'm an AE, right? So who do you hire to run that role? You're kind of like shit out of luck, right? And then, you know what? The founder's never going to want to pay somebody to open up doors. They're never going to want to pay them $120,000 salary plus, double that in OTE, which is what a sales rep would make.
Right.
They're not going to pay that for opening doors. So
even though that's the hardest job.
Even though it's the hardest job. So you're never actually going to be able to hire somebody that has the right experience. If you're going to talk to a CTO at a large enterprise that has 30 years experience, you need to hire somebody that has experience talking to CTOs at that level, or that have 20 years background in IT and now is doing sales, right?
I think one way that some companies have solved it, which is arguably just as hard or harder, is they avoid that model altogether and go bottom up. And it's like you got companies like Slack that will start with all the individuals using their own separate accounts until it just becomes everybody's using Slack, and then it bubbles up to the top and ultimately somebody writes a check. I mean, that's probably just as hard. But to sort of, I guess, bring it back to enterprise, we struggled with this. I remember my first company that I ran was an agency, and it was generally always me and Kevin doing the sales. We did actually at various points in time hire either a contractor or somebody internally on payroll in a sales role, but they almost always had to have their own book of business. They were never junior people. They always had like, I've worked in the agency world for 10, 20 years, and I know all these people who've moved around and they're in other parts of the country. I just go through my contact list to start, and now all of a sudden, my buddy is a VP at this at this company in Alberta, and they're looking for what you guys can do. So like that sort of, we didn't even realize it at the time. That was essentially what we were doing. We never hired an outbound BDR who was like fresh out of college.
Yeah, and in a lot of industries they don't, right? It's kind of popularized by SaaS in most cases. Like Salesforce really ran with that model and made it popular, and then everybody sees the Salesforce's stock performance, and they all want to be like Salesforce, so they're trying to replicate the model. But it's if you think about even the math around prospecting these days, it doesn't make sense. Nobody picks up their phones anymore. Right? There's spam filters. I get calls from the same 5 numbers every day, and my Google phone just pops up as potential spam call, so I don't even pick it up. Right?
There's tools now that will actually have a number in the prospect's local area.
Yeah.
Because you're more likely to answer the call if it's got your own local area code.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sleazy.
It's very sleazy.
But probably works really well.
It works really well, but if you don't recognize the number and they're calling you 3 times in a day, you probably think it's a family emergency of some sort, right?
Yeah. Well, on the topic of nobody picks up their phones, like I think one of the surprising things about HubSpot is they pioneered the inbound movement and really kind of waved the flag of like outbound is dead, nobody picks up their calls. But I remember as an agency owner, anytime I would download an ebook from HubSpot's website, I would get a cold call from a rep saying, "Hey, just saw you downloaded that SEO cheat sheet. Let's talk about, getting you on a demo or making you a partner." So, I mean, they definitely leveraged outbound, I would say, as much as inbound to build that.
Totally. And you know what? You have to use all the tools. Like you don't invest in one single channel in marketing, right? So you wouldn't do the same thing in sales. You need to use all the tools that are at your disposal. But, the math around prospecting these days isn't really good. Like open rates are down because of better spam filters, which means you get less replies on your emails. LinkedIn is getting saturated and everybody's sending you connection requests, so people pay less attention to it. People don't listen to voicemails anymore. I think that like the open rate on voicemails is like below, like it's like 0.01% or something like that. So it's like the math isn't there, so you have to have like crazy volume, and that's partly the reason why founders or sales leaders want to hire these very junior people to do that work, because the odds of actually succeeding aren't that high.
Yeah, 1% open rates, respond rates, and all that.
But at the same time, it's like if you're running enterprise, and to your example of like bringing in somebody that has those relationships properly built up, that's gonna run out at a certain point. But somebody that actually understands, okay, this is what as a person that's been in a CTO role for 30 years in this industry, this is what they care about. They know how to approach these people, right?
And at least get warm intros, because you're right, their book of business will run out eventually. They'll run out of people that they know who could be potential buyers. But if they're working their referrals properly, then at least it's easier to get on the call with that CTO at a Fortune 5000 when they've been referred by your other client who's a CTO at a Fortune 5000.
Yeah. And what's the other thing with the BDR role, which I feel is really, really hard, and especially on the enterprise side, is that a lot of BDRs coming in, again, they don't know, right? It's a new job really early on in their career, is that they come in thinking they're selling software, but they're not, right? They're selling, they're identifying pain and they're selling solutions, or they're trying to solve those pains. And a lot of it in the enterprise is navigating change management. To your point, like people want to protect what they already have because they're fearful of, if we move it, is it actually going to get better? So, for example, let's use sales software. If you're selling sales software to a sales leader, it's not just the sales leader that wants it, right? They might look at it and be like, this is awesome, but my team's never going to use this, right? So how do you get a sales rep that's been doing the same thing over and over and over again and getting their commission checks every month? How do you get them to change what they're doing and try to promise to them that is going to be better, right? So there's a lot of that stuff happening in, the larger enterprise deals where a BDR might not know that that's what they're actually selling.
I hope you enjoyed that discussion with Daniel. I'd love to know what your opinion is. What kind of sales rep should you be hiring when you're selling to enterprises? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit like and subscribe so more people can see this content.
This episode of Lifetime Value is brought to you by Proposify. Proposify improves sales productivity so your team spends less time creating proposals and more time selling. Start your free trial at proposify.com. And be sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss a single episode.